Academic Director of the Belarusian Institute for Strategic Studies.
Thank you. Еще раз. Здравствуйте.
Hello again, those of you who have just joined us. That is the 19th Minsk Forum, and now we're moving on to the next panel discussion, that is education, and the proper title is Education, a Non-Political Endeavour with Political Consequences. And here, during the panel discussion, Professor Barkouski spoke, and he most probably has already left. And usually he says that he tries to avoid pathos and sticks to figures only. But I remember a year ago, exactly 1 year ago, it was with an aura of pathos. He said that with this level of education in Belarus, authoritarianism should not be possible. And following, we're going to hold our panel discussion along the line of this reasoning. So education is a juxtaposition of different types of activities, of value-based activities, educational activities that are not political per se, but they do have a political weight, especially in the long run. And so some research has been done that shows that, in fact, there is this clear correlation between the level of democracy and the index of education. And as far as our participants are concerned, today we're going to speak to two panelists who are online, and two panelists are offline. As far as offline is concerned, one more person is going to join us. So we're going to listen to Tatiana Shchyttsova from the office of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya office, representative on education and science. She's a PhD professor at the European Humanities University. So Tatiana is here with us online. And also together with us we have Pavel Barkouski, who is a Doctor of Philosophy, an associate professor, and currently an independent researcher. But for a period of 15 years, he used to lecture at the Belarusian State University, and he was the witness of those. He witnessed the establishment of the university community and the uprising against repressions and injustice. And also together with us we're going to have Andrei Laurukhin, an expert on education, science and innovation. He is a PhD of philosophy, and Andrei is with us online. Do you hear us? Very good. And we do hope that Marek Gołkowski is going to join us. He is a representative of the Konstanty Kalinovsky Scholarship program based in Warsaw. So please be seated, sir. Yes, wherever you prefer, perhaps here. Okay, so all set. And let us begin with the presentation by Tatiana Shchyttsova. She would have to leave this panel discussion somewhat earlier on, as she has to catch the plane. So, Tatiana, we are interested in your opinions. If you could please share your opinions on the challenges that we face in the educational system in Belarus, and also what challenges is Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's office facing, because education of Belarusian men and women has to be done abroad. So I would like to give you the floor, and we are interested in your opinions. Please confirm that you hear me. Everything okay? Yeah? So thank you very much for the invitation, for possibility to speak. I do apologize, but unfortunately after my speech I would have to run away to the airport, so I won't have an opportunity to take part in the discussion. And perhaps I would like to speak in a concise fashion. I would like to present my opinion and to speak on this matter. As far as the challenges and tasks are concerned, perhaps that I speak as a representative on education and science of the Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's office. And here I need to speak in two parts. Part one refers to the current poignant problems, and the second part, I apologize, there is a very strong echo effect. There's a very strong echo effect that renders interpretation impossible. I'm afraid that Mrs. Shchyttsova has very strong echo effect. Interpretation is not possible due to a very strong echo effect. It is important to wear headsets. Could you please ask Mrs. Shchyttsova to wear the headsets? I apologize. We shall resume interpretation as soon as possible.
Is
This is interpreter's announcement. Due to technical problems with the quality of sound, we are not capable of providing full interpretation. There is a very strong echo effect, and interpretation is not possible due to the quality of sound. We apologize for that.
Right, so there are different scholarship programs. Sometimes people do not speak the language, and there are some other issues. So I wanted to say a few words about the situation that despite systemic approach, technical issues. Wait a second, please. Can I continue? Can I continue? Tatiana is asking whether she can continue.
We apologize. We're still having the same problems with the echo, so interpreting is not possible at the moment.
Негосударственных инициатив, которые, к счастью, давно, ну или относительно недавно, существуют в Беларуси. Есть много разных экспертных площадок, которые занимаются вопросами образования и школьного, и высшего, и подготовили целый ряд каких-то рабочих документов, предложений. Вот учитывая эту нашу ситуацию, я вижу главную задачу штаба Тsikhanouskaya в том, чтобы содействовать выстраиванию сегодня.
Our main task is today to build such a communication that would allow for developing this consolidated approach as part of the coalition, as part of the forum of different communities. We can reach an agreement, develop working documents that would represent the views of the expert society community of Belarus, so that when time is ripe to implement the reforms, we could do it. Currently, we have a lot of expert platforms. They all speak different languages. Discussions are very diverse, and I have an in-depth knowledge of the situation. So there is this focused approach, and we will develop a consolidated opinion. Mediation and navigation is going to be offered so that thanks to discussions we can draw conclusions, common conclusions. And we can build an expert platform, the bank of ideas, in order to build discussions, to exchange views, to organize events and initiatives, in order to build common understanding, taking into account what is to be done. And the last thesis I would like to raise during this discussion is an issue related to the relationship between civil society and the state. To what extent, taking into account that in future Belarus, educational institutions cannot be only state-owned institutions, but also private institutions of higher learning, there might be such a situation when we face the need to discuss such solutions. What do we focus on? What values do we support in terms of educational reforms? For example, to comment on that, if we have state-owned and private institutions, educational institutions, will this be public good or private good? Such discussions are underway in Western countries, and it is related to the fact that there are changes in the area of education, and there are changes related to the fact that during the last decade, neoliberal management was most widespread in terms of managing educational institutions. So one issue is what shall be done? What is our view of the image of a graduate of an ordinary Belarusian school? So the graduate of a general secondary school, what he or she shall look like, what type of knowledge do they obtain? This is an issue of utmost importance. Another issue is related to the fact that, dear colleagues, I'm addressing colleagues from the panel discussion. You've been dealing with these issues for a long time. Marek, Andrei, and Pavel. This neoliberal management approach and authoritarian traditions and legacies in some of the countries. This mixture has generated certain effects, including negative consequences, and Belarusian experts and researchers and scientists want to reform education in our country. There can be a trap that we got impressed by Western solutions, but some of those Western solutions which are technically really well established. But many of them, from the point of view of a general approach, ideology, could become tools for neoliberal management of educational establishments. There are discussions about scientific-centric approaches. And what about the approach that is suitable in the case of the reform of higher education in Belarus? When we discuss it all together, what principles have to be the milestones and pillars of future education, higher education in Belarus, we have to take into account the critical approach of intellectual tradition in the West. And secondly, we have to take into account post-Soviet and Central European discussions of scientists in the area of education, because neoliberal management and post-Soviet approaches create a very strange mixture. And we don't have time for that. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Спасибо большое, Татьяна.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for this multifaceted speech. We have heard quite a number of ideas about how to promote life learning of our teachers, educators, also in the area of acquiring the knowledge of English language, the neoliberal management under the conditions of authoritarianism. This is an extremely important issue as well. Unfortunately, Tatiana, are you with us? I can hear you, but I have to leave, Tatiana is saying. One question. Shall you answer one question very briefly? If you have a brief question for Tatiana, please. Tatiana, I have a brief question. The stance of the Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's office or staff on reform of education. Would you like to implement reforms after the change of the political situation in the country? Or would you rather prepare your approach and reform now before the changes in the country? What would your answer be? Thank you, Pavel. We have to get ready right now, straight away. Maybe I wasn't clear on that. We have to be ready now, but we will implement it when it is possible. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
And now we shall move on. Let us move on to the next speaker. I would like to invite Pavel Barkouski. And for technical reasons, so we have had some organizational difficulties, and I also understand that it's important also to speak just a little bit slower, so as also to help the interpreters. And please remember that we have 10 to 12 minutes per speech. And now I'd like to give the floor to Pavel Barkouski, as I mentioned before. He was an active participant and a witness of the movement of the university, movement of the academic community, and would be interesting to see how those events have affected the academic community and what shall we expect in the future. How about the potential of the academic community, that of professors and students? So what do you think? I would like to begin with that today we have a double tragic date. That is, this is the anniversary of Roman Abadarенko's death, who died last year. And also today we have an anniversary of the Black Thursday. That is the day 12 student activists were arrested, who then were processed and they were sentenced to 2.5 years in a colony. So I would like to begin with a minute of silence. Thank you. And I shall be brief because this topic is quite vast and there is so much material on that. And my topic, the way I see it, is to talk about the way the academic milieu in Belarus is linked with protests. And as far as the academic community are concerned, the teachers and students, just like many more citizens in Belarus, were very much active as citizens, being citizens. But they also voiced their own specific position as members of the community as they took part in those events. So I'm speaking of the academic community of higher educational facilities, of universities, because as far as secondary schools are concerned, it's more difficult at the level of the secondary school to organize any civil movement, and teachers were very much limited in voicing their civil position as teachers of secondary schools, and they, as teachers, they could simply express their own opinions. And sometimes in secondary schools, school children went on public protests against a public policy, or graduates of secondary schools, for instance, were protesting by putting diplomas on school fences, and this is how they were expressing their disagreement with the falsification of the results of the elections, and this is how they were supporting their secondary school teachers. Now, as far as the academic community is concerned, then in this case, primarily students took part in the protests for a number of reasons. And professors, the academics, could not support the movement to the same extent, although partially they were supporting. And I would like to show some video materials now. This is a documentary that was done by students themselves. It's called Gaudamos, that is the students' protests in Belarus. And if you have not yet seen this video material on YouTube, full version, and it shows, it's an insider view, so how the protests were organized and carried out by the Belarusian students. And in my brief contribution, I would like to speak about a number of issues. This is how the academic academic community joined the protests. And also, let us talk about the current expectations. So first and foremost, I was saying that the academic community had its own face within the framework of the general civil protests, and both teachers and students of many universities, primarily Minsk universities, but also some regional universities, were clearly expressing their civil position. And they were speaking as the academic community against what was happening in Belarus. And the main forms of protest that they used as the academic community were marches. Those were students' marches. So you were usually starting at the college buildings, and they were also organizing joint protests that were organized both by students and teachers, but also different types of actions. For instance, singing songs at the university campus, or posting posters in front of the university buildings, or the sit-in protests where students were leaving and sitting outside, and this is how they were expressing their civic stance, or the flash mobs. And the flash mobs were organized both by students and teachers to express their civic civic position, and it shows that a large part of society disagreed with what was happening. And there were some other forms of protest that were not that conspicuous, but they did happen. For instance, strikes. And strikes were not as famous as strikes staged by some of the companies, but in fact, students were actively striking on strike. They were not attending lessons and lectures, especially in September and in October of 2020. So there was a wave of strikes, student strikes, and I know that some of the students were on strike throughout the first semester, and the university management was being loyal, and they were not obstructing such protests for students. And also there were different types of consultations and negotiations, and there were talks with Kachanov and with other members of the administration, and so there were different talks about possible reconciliation. Also, students were dressing up in specific way. They were also waving banners and flags, and were also distributing stickers within the university campus. And so that was showing the activity level of the academic community. And also we were doing video material like this one, and also we were appealing to hold proper elections and to stop violence. And in fact, that was done in the name of students and teachers of universities. And sometimes they were holding some topical talks and discussions and psychological training for the participants of protest movements. So it was not really very much presented in the mass media, but the students were active in many different forms. So as you can see, a large variety of different forms of protest, and the academic community reacted very strongly. And it was more or less safe for the participants, for themselves. And so the students and the teachers were reacting. And but then the level of tension increased, and some students were some students and teachers were in fact laid off from the university for political reasons. So the tension is still there. But who were the participants of such events? Most and foremost, those were students and some teachers in particular. I would say that that was the age group under 35. And but in fact, there were many active people up to 50, and usually those were representatives of the universities in the capital city. So those were usually the students and teachers of the top 5, top 10 universities, but also Polsk University was quite active. And was it a coordinated activity, type of activity? This is sometimes that this was presented in court and charges were made that everything was coordinated. But in fact, it was self-organization. It was a horizontal type of activity. So the participants themselves, they were not marionettes in the hands of anyone. That was a very much spontaneous movement and self-organized movement. And other universities were joining in, but in fact, all those protests were not coordinated, and there was some aid, structural, organizational support given to students, and some people who could share their experience or knowledge were doing so. But it is not to say that they were highly influential. It's not to say that they were organizing anything at all. And then there was this huge wave of so the Black Thursday was the beginning of the wave of repressions, and then the wave of repression started, and some of the teachers were laid off, but they were laid off from universities not on the grounds of political for political reasons, but usually they were laid off allegedly due to the termination of their contracts of employment at the universities. But we all know what that really means, and so also many students had to leave their universities after examination sessions for allegedly being poor academic progress, and some teachers were laid off because they were no longer needed. And so this is how the authorities were regulating the situation at the universities. So officially speaking, universities are quiet. Officially speaking, there are no protests at the universities at the moment. But is it to say that the academics today, that the students today, are they capable of becoming active participants or active drivers of change? Are they capable of doing so today? I think that today we cannot actually claim that, because the academic community shares the point of view of other academic milieus in Belarus. So the academic community shall be ready to join a new wave of protest. However, I doubt that the academic community itself would be a champion of protests. So a certain level of dissatisfaction has been maintained in society, which is understood, which is clear. But I do not think that the academic community is ready for any active participation due to high level of political risk. There is a very high risk of political participation, and due to very strong political repressions, they're not ready to take an active part in protests. So I think that the academic community stays put with their values and their ideals. They are going to be protesting or the protest activities that shall be organized by someone else. So they're going to join protests that are going to be staged by some other organizations. So I understand that this is quite a big topic, and it is impossible to present it in greater detail within such short period of time. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, and I'm sure that there will be questions, but the questions will be asked later once everyone speaks. And the next speaker is going to be online again, Andrei Laurukhin, who is an expert on education, science, and innovation. And Andrei Laurukhin was leading a project on reforming education, on the reform of the educational system in Belarus after the hypothetical but also real transition to democracy.
The project on reforms was developed within the office of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, Not really. The educational officer for New Belarus, Olga Szparaka. Thank you. Thank you for this comment and clarification. And the participants of our forum will be the first to hear about the preliminary results of this project. So over to you, Andrei. 10 up to 12 minutes. I know it is extremely difficult, but still please take an attempt. Thank you, Piotr. Thank you, dear organizers, for your kind invitation. I'm happy to take the floor and share my views on this issue. Let me start with delineating the scope of challenges and problems. Let us start with higher education. During the last year, starting August 2020, preliminary data show, and statistical data are very difficult to collect, and they might not be very precise. From Belarus, more than 5,000 students moved out of Belarus and study abroad. 50% of them are migrants who are not necessarily related to political pressure. Traditionally, there has been a huge outflow of students from Belarus when people preferred to study in the Russian Federation. The majority of students studied there. And over the last 5 years, we can see the growth of the number of students who study in Poland, and Poland becomes the competitor country compared to the Russian Federation. The general population of students studying in Poland within 2-3 years will be comparable to the number of students studying in the Russian Federation. So we must say that there is a shift in the tendency. People move from Russia to countries of Western Europe, and this tendency could be seen this year as well. It is also vital that out of 5,000 student migrants, 2,500 are immigrants who left the country for political reasons. Tatiana Shchyttsova described the initiative under the CBMA auspices, and in cooperation with it, it is a scholarship program to support students. 1,500 applications were filed for political reasons, the majority of them. And we must say that taking into account verification of this motivation, there might be some issues with the verification of these reasons, but we must say that political reasons might be one of the main driving factors. There is a huge belief that actually it is so. And my preliminary conclusion would be that at least 2,500 students have left the country to study abroad for political reasons. Is this tendency going to develop? Are we going to see a rise in the number of student migrants? It is very sensitive to political repressions against dissenters who study at universities. For example, it is true of journalism, political science, sociology, humanities in general. And of course, pressure and censorship and open repressions continue, and they become more and more drastic and brutal. This year, apart from the growing crackdown on universities and institutions, and there is a growing censorship and pressure, and the model of firing lecturers and expelling students is being honed better and better. So people are expelled apparently for other reasons, but in fact it is politically motivated. And university administration has honed its methods. There is a deputy rector position now on ideology and education. Previously, it existed in a latent form, but now this is an official position. And people from law enforcement or law enforcement-related employees or those who cooperate with law enforcement hold this position of the vice rector on education, upbringing, and ideology. So in such a way, we create the closed institutions, an institution of people surveilling each other, and people report on each other, and so on and so forth. This does not promote open mind and open thinking within universities. Pavel has already mentioned these issues. We could see those pictures when the students were brutally treated by law enforcement, and rectors of universities are appointed by the president of Belarus. This is what is stipulated in the code, and we can see it in practice. So without the consent of Lukashenko, we wouldn't have a single rector that runs universities. The Bologna process is underway. In November 2020, there was a conference of ministries from the European countries, and the issue of repressions against university lecturers and students was at the center of discussion. And 3 countries initiated resolutions. The UK, Germany, and Scotland initiated the resolution. Unfortunately, the initiative was blocked. For example, France was against it, and the Russian Federation issued a statement which made impossible to develop a common resolution. Let me quote. The Russian Federation says, "We are really concerned that the resolution on the situation in Belarus," this document was presented during the conference, "is politically motivated. We are against interference in the internal domestic policy of a neighboring state." You can read the text of this Russian Federation's statement. It is available online. And Belarus is still part of the Bologna process, but its status is unclear. The roadmap could be developed for Belarus as well, but it was not implemented. But speaking of university and academic freedom, it is non-existent in Belarus. This status quo, the state of the art, as Piotr has announced, there is a research underway. I will say a few words about it as well myself. But first, a few words about secondary school. which is also under pressure. Let me remind you, more than 50% of polling stations commissions were representatives of schools. These were teachers. So teachers took part in election fraud, which means that the society distrusts teachers. So the reputation and the status of the teacher profession has deteriorated. So events after the dramatic presidential election mean that there are differences in approach to teachers, and the voting took place in polling stations, which in many cases were located in school buildings. And parents were asking, we don't need your diplomas, you have sold your honesty. And there are some proofs that teachers were involved in election fraud. So there is a mistrust on the part of the society towards teachers. The next issue, politics and education and teaching. Is it possible to offer teaching outside of politics? So if it is not related to politics, is it really possible? So this is a range of questions that we might address. Secondary school is under pressure and intervention, political intervention. You might have heard that there are new positions of military arts teachers, so former officers become teachers of military arts and patriotic upbringing of minors, of children under 18. Andrei, I'm very sorry, Andrei. Can you please sum up on the project of reforms? Because we're running out of time, so you've got 3-4 minutes. Let me now move to the part on research. So reaction to challenges is one thing, and these challenges can be treated as drivers of awakening of public awareness and the reset of understanding of what education is about. So we believed, and we still believe, that it is productive to think about future reforms and to prepare expert community and society to understand the direction of changes. As part of the research that Piotr announced from the Office on New Belarus, under my leadership, we have developed a set of reforms, a set of documents based on analytical research in the area of special, secondary, and higher education. These were 3 projects. And the major approaches are as follows. These are 2 aspects, 2 major components that are most necessary: fighting bureaucracy and fighting ideologization.
So we have developed a scenario of possible development of events, and also the most optimum of them refers to a possible transition to democratic development of the country, and it was presented as the most successful possible scenario. So basically speaking, as far as the materials are concerned, they are still in development. They're being fine-tuned. So that is why I could not present you this material for today. But generally speaking, the structure, the principal ideas have already been shaped. So the point is to take a set of specific measures that could be proposed so as to de-bureaucratize within a reasonable period of time, within 2 years. And also it is important to develop a roadmap for possible reforms and to have that roadmap ready for de-idealization and for de-bureaucratization. So I understand that my time is over, so I will be more than happy to answer your possible questions. But please stay with us. And if there are questions, and I think there will be questions, then we will delve into this topic of the reform. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Marek Gołkowski from the Konstanty Kalinovsky Scholarship Program. I almost wanted to say Tsikhanouskaya Scholarship Program, but it's Kalinovsky Scholarship Program, I apologize. And Kalinowski's program has been out there for 15 years now. And within this period of time, we've already seen a number of generations of students using this program. But I understand that 2020 was a very special year, but there were other years that are quite significant, that is 2010, 2011, but 2020 is a very special year in many different terms. So it would be interesting to know from you about the new challenges that the Kalinovsky program is facing. So what are the challenges that you're facing, and how would you optimize the development of students and the development of those scientists who have addressed you as a result of the current events in Belarus? Thank you. My name is Marek Gołkowski. I represent the Warsaw University, the Eastern Studies Institute. This is where we run the Kalinovsky Scholarship Program. This program was developed in 2006 under the auspices of the chairperson of the Council of Ministers. At that time, it was Kazimierz Marcinkiewicz, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And this program was aimed to provide scholarship aid to those students who could not continue their education in Belarusian universities. So the idea is very beautiful. And the financial possibilities with this program have never been huge, despite high auspices of the prime ministers. But of course, we need to speak in the context of 2020. And since 2020, we have received approximately 1,000 students on the scholarship program. So practically speaking, we do not run educational activities as such. So we have a number of students who have come here to study for post-diploma courses, or also those are students who are enrolled at the Warsaw University. But the majority of students that we support, they actually do not study at the University of Warsaw at the moment. And so once the program was established, we used to enroll 30 to 40 students a year, having two programs. The first program is full education at universities at BA level, and also MA studies. And also we had students who were coming to Poland for a year-long internship, and so they So during their internship programs, they could cooperate with our scientists, with Polish scientists, and this is how they were writing their diploma works. So undoubtedly, our scholarship program was not attractive enough to have a huge wave of students coming to Poland. But what is important is that we faced two circumstances playing at the same time, that is COVID, related restrictions, and also the level of repressions in Belarus. Usually the scientists from the Eastern European Studies Center used to travel to Minsk and also to other cities in Belarus to hold exams there. So candidates were sitting exams, and thus they were going through the qualifications and enrollment process. And this is how we used to test the level of readiness of those students to undertake studies in Poland, and that was a great opportunity for us to test the knowledge of the Polish language on site, so that those students who would travel to Poland, that they would speak some level of Polish, would have some level of the command of the Polish language, although that was not necessary. And this is how we used to work since 2006, and there were some pauses, as it was the case in 2010. And this program was less intensive. I do not want to say that the program had no perspective of development, but the program was not being developed. But thanks to Alexander Grigorevich in 2020, in 2020, we had an avalanche of people who were forced to leave Belarus.
Даже если не сказать искать политубежище.
And even if not in search of the political asylum in Poland, but then at least in search of social asylum in Poland. And I wish I would like to refrain from statistics, but still let me quote two figures. The first figure is 624 interested in 2020 and 430 interested in 2021. And in 2020, due to special measures that special funds that we received, we were capable of enrolling all interested. And in 2021, it was no longer possible. Unfortunately, I should say. And of course, I do not wish to argue with the numbers, but according to the Belarusian House, we know that approximately 13,000 Belarusian students study in Poland, but not within the framework of our Eastern European Studies Center, because now we have approximately 1,000 plus students, and to that we need to add 900 students who study at NAVA within the framework of the NAVA. So of that, 2,000 of students are right now in Poland, I guess. And would like to address your attention to something new, to a new aspect that we paid attention to during our interviews with the Belarusian candidates. First, there is a huge geographical difference. Earlier on, those usually were students from Minsk, Brest, and Grodno, so from Western Belarus, basically speaking. But in 2020, we already saw a very new phenomenon. And I was very much surprised, although I do have quite a lot of experience with the Belarusian affairs. But Vitebsk and Polak University, but then Mogilov and Gomel University as cities joined the stream, and that was strange for me, because it turns out that those cities that were considered to be rather lenient towards Russia, that they were leaning towards the Russian-speaking community. And all of a sudden, those towns started looking for help in a very different direction. So they actually they became interested in Poland, and that was very interesting. And another observation, the second observation, very large group of people could easily communicate in the Belarusian language, but they could not possibly study it at home. So we see an increased interest of the intelligentsia to the Belarusian language. So we found a very new way of identifying or identification already in eastern Belarus. Now, the third interesting point that we observed is, paradoxically speaking, the utilization of the mechanism was introduced by Belarusian authorities in the 1990s when the Chechens were moving to Poland. So those people were allowed to approach the border so that they could cross the border unchecked, uncontrolled, for them to appear in the territory of Poland. And it worked in 2020 again. And in this case, those were actually refugees, Belarusian refugees. And yes, those were single cases, but sometimes the border guards were even allowing their colleagues to cross the border, even if they had no visas, for them to be thus making it possible for them to run away to Poland, which was very curious. And just a word of commentary on the documents that we were actually forced our Belarusian students to present in Poland. So we needed IDs. Well, that's obvious. We needed to have some IDs, but also documents that would certify their secondary education, because in Poland one cannot study without having secondary education. And then, all of a sudden, the Polish universities started saying that they would not expect Belarusian students to present their secondary education certificates. What is most important, that those students are capable of studying well in Poland. So that was the first major change. And another point, which seems to be quite easily understood, of course, we would not ask the KGB to question those who are running to Poland. So we obviously do not need any documents from the Belarusian KGB in order to admit someone to study in Poland. That's obvious. So we immediately decided, okay, that we would actually trust those people, and whatever they were telling us during the interviews, we would trust them during our interviews. And I used to take part in those meetings, and I should say that all of our scientific staff found it to be very difficult to they found it very difficult to listen to what was being told to us by those students who had experienced torture, especially young girls. This is the type of experience none of us would ever wish to experience, but you could see that those people were broken down during interviews, and we were asking them to stop, not to tell about those hard experiences, and there was some. There were some funny situations where we were telling students, you don't have to share any information with us. We're not the Polish border guard. We are not interrogating you. We simply need some information that will allow us to enroll you into the scholarship program. But so this was something new. And finally, we see people We see people from other parts of Belarus who are interested in this another sphere of culture. So they directed their steps. They became interested in a different cultural sphere.
It is also extremely important to know that these were people who were not fluent in Polish. Actually, they didn't have any contact with Polish. But it was not a problem, of course, but due to the fact that as part of our program we had this recruitment, I'm talking about 2020, starting in August until December. And only later on, those of them who have stayed in Poland and they had some issues with the visas, not everyone could take part in the 10-month-long Polish language course. Some of them had a shorter course, so not all of them could study at the university for the lack of knowledge of the Polish language. And this was our response to a social problem. It was not about education as such. Kalinowski's program is a scholarship program, and we are scientifically and academically oriented, and we always want to support those who have potential to learn, to study in Poland, and so that they can obtain higher education and obtain diplomas. But due to repressions, we had to focus on social issues as well. So not all of them who were of the right age, let's say, for studying at the universities, we still accepted these people, we enrolled them. I have 1 more minute left. Can I name the programs that we have? First, Kalinowski's program, university education, the classical approach. Second program, the course and 10 months internship, and solidarity with Belarus starting in 2020. Under Kalinovsky's program for those who were forced to flee Belarus or had to leave Belarus. There is a difference between fleeing, escaping, and leaving Belarus. And we have both categories of students. Free Belarusian University, we have such an idea. Professor Milinkevich tries to launch this university to offer broader opportunities for education. The Club of Graduates, University Graduates, we hope will expand and disseminate information about Kalinovsky's program. And finally, the analytical group Belarus in the region, and the staff for New Belarus is also about diplomatic teaching and learning. So we have our students, our graduates, those who take part in internships. We want to help, and we don't want to interfere with those who are in Poland and want to study. Thank you very much, Marek, for your work and for your presentation and for your speech. And we have 10 minutes left to answer questions to our speakers. Unfortunately, Tatiana Shchyttsova is on her way to the airport already, but we can address questions at the other 3 speakers. So please ask your questions. If you are not having security issues, please introduce yourself. Unfortunately, we cannot hear without the mic.
Знаю, что на уровне
I know that at the level of the college and university, you know the issue of the apostille. The Polish legislation requires that a secondary school certificate has to have an apostille, which means that it has to be approved by the Ministry of Education in Belarus or in the embassy. So if someone is a refugee, gets political asylum, this person cannot contact the embassy or ministry in Belarus. We know that this is bureaucracy, and we have to do something to amend the law. Can we help with that? Maybe Belarusian organizations can help with that. Maybe our association can assist you with the Warsaw University, with the Kalinovsky Scholarship Program. Anna Kaniewska, we know, always contacts you on these issues. Let us solve this problem. Maybe you have an idea about how to solve this issue. If I may, I'm going to focus on something I know and decisions I've been taking and the decisions I made. We are very flexible and open. If someone crossed the river of Bug, we are not expecting this person to prove a secondary school certificate in the Belarusian embassy or in Belarus. We are not requiring that this person approves the certificate in the Ministry of Education of Belarus. It's impossible. So we are flexible. And we have the rules. And the rules are very strict, but in a different sense. We have the human being at the center of our attention. We focus on a human being. We know that he or she or relatives or acquaintances of his or her, what can happen also to them. If someone was expelled from the university, we wouldn't say, go back and get a certificate of attending classes at the university in Belarus. It would be a joke. In Polish, we say that you can see what is true during laundry. So you can actually see the crux of the matter in practice. We didn't have any issues with our students who have been enrolled. If someone had good results during the interview, and those who have been enrolled are good students, successful students. They don't have problems with studies. They don't have communication problems with the Polish society. It is also very important because from scientific academic program, it has become a socially motivated program. So some of the people who wanted to leave, they left, or some of them were forced to leave. And I often ask students, are you not afraid of being Polonized? And I must say, many people were laughing, were smiling at me. So this was partially propaganda, and they're not afraid of Polonization. And I'm repeating to my students, the more languages you know, the more lives you have. When I speak Russian, we know Russian culture. And we like and love Dostoevsky, not Lenin, of course, although both wrote in Russian. For us, Russian literature is Bulgakov, although some say he's Ukrainian, but he wrote in Russian. This is Russian language literature. And it is really good to know other cultures and languages. So I'm saying You have to speak the language of your enemy, of Poles, when you are in Poland, and your life will be easier. We do not put pressure on people whenever it's possible. But if we have some doubts whether this person is a graduate of secondary school or not, then we have to inquire into that and try to get at least some proof of that. Secondary Belarusian schools have not caused problems with giving certificates, issuing certificates. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but there are no black and white pictures. You can continue the discussion during our break, our lunch break, and let us not say about the language of the enemy, that is the Polish language. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the mic. Sorry, the mic is not working.
Окей, хорошо. Я думал, мне дали включенный микрофон. Простите.
I'm sorry, let me repeat. Taking into account interpretation, I would like to add that today we haven't mentioned firing Belarusian teachers as part of the repression. Until 2020, I used to be an associate professor at the university, and some of the lecturers were fired as a result of participation in protests. For example, I am an example of such a person. And I decided to leave my job because I wanted to be outside of the mechanism of repression. So we have to take into account such people as well. So these are not always victims of being fired, but they also leave their university positions as a sign of protest. Thank you very much for your comment. How about questions? Maybe there are some brief questions, or else there are no questions. We are running out of time, and there is going to be lunch soon. During discussions, we often hear a question: how could we help students and those who undergo internship in Poland? We have a proposal, a suggestion. In Belarus, we don't have such opportunities. In Poland, we do have them. And whenever someone thinks about studying in Poland, maybe it is good to create conditions for contact with the Polish language in Belarus. It is extremely important. Those who come to Poland to study, they are 2 years younger compared to Polish students. It is extremely vital because in Poland, you do not treat students as children. They have to be grown-ups. So you can disseminate this information and prepare Belarusian young people so that they are independent once they start studying in Poland. We used to have a student, a female student, who wanted to study in Poland. She doesn't have any Polish origin. She didn't have any contact with Polish culture, but she spoke Polish in a brilliant way because her mother forced her to study Polish for 3 years so that she could take part in the Kalinovsky Scholarship program.
And her mother used to work as a cleaning lady in Poland. So it shows that there are people who know how to face this problem. I apologize for that, but that is very important. Yes, thank you for this practical advice, and important for us Belarusians who we know people who potentially speaking may need a possibility to continue their studies or to continue their scientific career in Poland or in any other country. So thank you very much for that. And I would like to thank Andrei Laurukhin, one of the speakers who is offline. I would like to thank Pavel Barkouski, and I would like to thank Mr. Gołkowski. Thank you very much for your kind participation and for the work that you do. Right. And by this, we shall conclude this panel discussion. We know that education is an important topic, and those who work in this sphere need even more energy to work, because this is very important. And now, to the best of my understanding, it's lunchtime. See you.